You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 16th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme.
I want to trust the Australian people. I want to back our values and I want to build Australia's future.
Australia's election and televised debate is underway, with incumbent Anthony Albanese showing some surprising strength, thanks in part to Donald Trump. After that, we'll look at whether Japan can be among those chosen few to broker a trade deal with the United States. We check in with a tech and innovation summit in Africa, and we'll get the latest business headlines. And finally,
each component of our facade is hand-woven. It is not a mere structure. It is not a building. It is an experience, and it comes to life.
Our latest Osaka Expo installment turns to the Philippines Pavilion. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. The election campaign in Australia is now well underway, with party leaders facing off in their second televised debate today. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's party does appear to be doing very well, which would mark a rare win for an establishment candidate in elections around the world over this past year. And while joining me now is Latika Bourke, editor-at-large for The Nightly Australia. Latika, good to have you back on the show. How is Albanese doing at the moment? Let's start with that. Are Australians actually kind of happy with their politicians?
No, they're not. But there's a couple of things going on, and the most obvious is Donald Trump. He's the third wheel, if not the third candidate in this election, and it's really radically reshaped the fortunes of the governing Labor Party. It holds a tiny, tiny majority. It's fighting for its political life, and around 3 months ago, it was not looking good for Labor. It was looking like they would either slide into minority government or even lose a government after a first term, which wouldn't have happened since the Depression. So it was a really historic fate potentially awaiting this government, but things have really turned around. One, Anthony Albanese has demonstrated a campaign fitness that we've just never seen before. Two, as I mentioned, Donald Trump has really driven a truck through this election. And three, the opposition leader, the Conservative leader, Peter Dutton, has surprised everybody by being woefully underprepared. And he's made a string of big mistakes. So all in all, to answer your question, at halfway through, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese looks like he is in a very strong position. He's turned his polling around and he's now in the lead. And voters are starting to show a greater dislike for the opposition leader than they do the Prime Minister.
So then, as is often the case in elections, this appears to be a little bit more of a lesser of two evils than it is a strong vote for the government. Tell us more about Peter Dutton and why he has failed so much. Why is he not seen, right now at least, as a viable alternative?
There's a couple of reasons. One, he really capitalised on, you might remember there was a big referendum held in Australia midway through Anthony Albanese's first term about recognising Indigenous Australians in the Voice. Now, that was overwhelmingly rejected by 60% of the population and every single state and territory in Australia, which is really remarkable. And he chose the no side of that, so the winning side of that, really early on when it was quite unpopular to do so. He basically had a very good run in the polls since then. He was seen to have picked the right side when it was unpopular. He proposed things like a nuclear power policy for Australia, which is a big, big no-no. There's been bipartisan opposition to that forever. And it was seen to be demonstrating a bit of political courage and a point of difference. Now, on the other hand, you had the Prime Minister suffering high inflation, just like every other incumbent around the world. And having put that referendum up and failed to win it was largely seen as focusing on a culture kind of issue that was not of great priority to Australians when their budgets were just collapsing around. But since then, we have seen the government really knuckle down. It's come out with not very inspiring policies, to be honest, about free Medicare, which is doctor's appointments and things like this, but certainly not earth-shattering national reform. By contrast, Peter Dutton has not had any policies ready to go, and this has been a huge shock and surprise. People thought that he was quietly preparing while he was capitalising on the grievance politics of the last 2 to 3 years. But it turns out he's been, I guess, caught with his pants down, really.
It is very interesting the way you describe it, that lack of preparation. But nonetheless, as you alluded to in your first answer, Latika, he would have been doing well were it not for some of the developments around Donald Trump and the US. Tell us more about how that has impacted this campaign. Is it about the tariffs and how they will impact the cost of living in Australia, or is it about other aspects of the sort of US-Australia relationship?
It's everything. It's Donald Trump's re-election, which Australians weren't overly comfortable with. It is the way that Donald Trump has trashed relationships. I think the Oval Office moment with President Zelensky was a big turning point. I think that sharpened in people's minds that the America we're seeing right now is not an America that's necessarily our friend, and it's certainly not Ukraine's friend. And that's a really big, shocking reorientation of what it means to be Australian, because our whole security depends on ANZUS alliance, which is the idea that the US has got our back. Now, if the US is starting to say to some of its traditional allies, we don't have your back anymore, and actually we're a bit sick of you, having had your back for so long, might they do that to us? Now, it's not quite the same, because our threat, of course, is China in the Indo-Pacific. It's not Russia, and China is the priority for this administration, we are told. So there's no kind of immediate sense that the ANZUS alliance will break down. But what it does do is really unsettle and makes uncertain our future in the world. And Peter Dutton has really lent into, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, lent into MAGA ideology at times. He, for instance, tasked his Indigenous Affairs frontbench Shadow Minister, Jacinta Price, who was the big face of that no voice referendum campaign. And he tasked her with setting up a Doge-style government efficiency. Then he proposed cutting 41,000 public servants. That would be half the public service of Australia, for context. Then he proposed banning working from home. Now, all these things, maybe one of them, even 3 years ago, would have been fine. But altogether right now, after Elon Musk and Donald Trump have just dominated headlines in Australia for the last 3 to 4 months, it's just suddenly absolutely toxic to the Australian people. Deep in Australian culture, they resent being Americanised. There is a strong inherent resistance to the Americanisation of our culture, of our politics, and certainly of key issues like gun control, for example, and healthcare. So this is really, I think, more than anything, that has really toxified the opposition leader.
Latika Bourke, editor-at-large for The Nightly Australia. Thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Monica Lillis with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Malaysia's King Sultan Ibrahim today on his tour of the region. President Xi will also hold talks with the nation's Prime Minister. The Malaysian Foreign Ministry said both leaders will sign multiple bilateral agreements amid Washington's sweeping tariffs. Peru's former president, Ollanta Humala, has been found guilty of money laundering and sentenced to 15 years in prison. A court in Lima found Humala had accepted illegal funds to bankroll his election campaigns in 2006 and 2011. His wife, Nadine Heredia, has also been found guilty. And Japan's visitor numbers have surpassed the 10 million mark, the fastest ever pace in March. According to official data, the weak yen caused a huge boost in the arrivals of foreign visitors for business and leisure. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Monica. Among the more than 70 countries hoping to negotiate an end to US tariffs in what's left of Donald Trump's 90-day pause would be Japan. Economy Minister Ryusei Akazawa is heading to Washington this week for critical trade negotiations. Japan is hoping for the complete removal of a 10% baseline tariff on all goods, as well as a 25% tariff on cars. It is trying to appeal to Trump's deal-making, proposing a win-win relationship for through increased Japanese investment rather than tariffs. And I'm joined now by Peter Landers, Asia Business and Finance Editor at The Wall Street Journal. Peter, thanks very much for coming back on the show. These tariffs against Japan, like elsewhere, many of them, or some of them rather, are already in place. There's been a pause on the reciprocal aspects, but the 10% is in place, the 25% on cars is in place. So perhaps to start with, what sort of impact are the tariffs currently having on the Japanese economy and companies?
It's a big blow for Japan because they're a big exporter of cars to the United States. Even now, it's true that companies like Toyota, Honda, Nissan, they do have factories inside the U.S. And of course, they're going to need to expand production at those factories if Trump's policy stays in place. But Toyota still exports hundreds of thousands of cars from Japan to the U.S., for example. And if there is a 25% tariff, that really makes it almost uneconomical.
And Peter, were the Japanese, either companies or the government, surprised, frankly, that they did not get a reprieve from those U.S. tariffs initially because in part of what you talk about there, the U.S. investment of Japanese companies? They seem to also have a pretty good relationship with Donald Trump.
That's right. Trump himself has talked about his good relationship with Japan. He always mentions the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He calls Abe a good friend. And he had a successful meeting with the current Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, in February. So Trump does not seem ill-inclined towards Japan, but I think he also has said that he doesn't want to make exceptions, and he does believe that Japan has taken advantage of U.S. openness and open markets over the years. So Japan was disappointed, certainly, I think, but not surprised.
He doesn't want to make exceptions. At the same time, Trump has also talked about being flexible. He's also muted this idea of a pause on the auto tariffs. And with all of that in mind, I guess, what is your expectation from this meeting of Japan's economy minister going to D.C.? What are they going to be looking for here? And what do they mean with this idea of a win-win relationship?
Japan certainly is willing to offer more investment in the United States by its companies. For example, Nippon Steel, the Japanese steelmaker, has proposed to buy U.S. steel and invest maybe $7 or even $10 billion in U.S. steel production, whereas Trump has said he doesn't like the idea of a Japanese company owning an iconic U.S. steelmaker. So that deal is perhaps also on the table. But in general, Japan says it's happy to encourage its companies to invest more in the United States and perhaps buy more American liquefied natural gas, LNG, from places like Louisiana and Alaska. So there's a lot that Japan can offer, but maybe some of it is an extension of what they're already doing. And the question is whether that would satisfy Trump.
And to that question of what would satisfy Trump, this is obviously a difficulty for many countries. It's not really clear what would lead to a reduction in tariffs necessarily. And with that in mind, then, if the tariffs do continue, Peter, what are you seeing from companies in terms of countermeasures they're already planning on taking, and what kind of measures they would take if they really feel like these tariffs are here to stay?
In the short term, I think they would have to increase production at their U.S. factories. The car makers would have to somehow reorganize their supply chains. This is not really short term. This is more medium and long term. They would have to get more parts from inside the U.S., having spent years or decades even building this North American supply chain that incorporates Canadian and Mexican plants. For example, Toyota makes a lot of its RAV4 vehicles, I believe, in Canada and exports them to the U.S. My sister, in fact, has one of those cars. So it's just been baked into the business model of the companies, and they would have to alter that as much as they could and as quickly as they could if they really believe that these tariffs are here to stay on autos and auto parts.
Peter Landers of The Wall Street Journal, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. Gitex Africa is underway in Marrakesh. It is in its third year and it's among the continent's biggest tech and innovation shows. It is backed by Dubai, which highlights the role that the UAE has been playing in Africa of late. And like so many other industries and fairs, it has been impacted by the US tariff debate and trade wars and what that means for African businesses, entrepreneurs and economies. Well, Tammy Emma Pepin is strategy and communications consultant who joins us from the summit in Morocco now. Tammy, thanks very much for coming on the show. Tell us a little more, first of all, about Gitex Africa. What is it exactly?
My pleasure, Chris, and thank you so much for having me. Gitex Africa is the continent's largest technology and startup event organized under the patronage of the King of Morocco. And we're entering day 3 here, final day of the summit. It's been incredibly vibrant, a very busy event. With thousands of people here in Marrakesh, so policymakers, innovators, startups, VC, and they're all converging to shape the future of digital transformation, innovation, and life in Africa. And I have to say, going into day 3, it really feels, it's way more than a consumer tech event. It really feels like a big ecosystem moment. So we're seeing new ecosystems that are taking off across all sectors through the lens of this digital transformation. And as you've mentioned, in the context of the tariffs and a lot of uncertainty from economies that are traditionally stable. So it's a lot of opportunity for the continent, and we're seeing a lot of unity. And it's also incredibly layered. So, I'd like to maybe go over the ecosystems and then perhaps dive into a few of those components. So some of the core themes of the convention this year, as you mentioned, in its third year, obviously AI and everything that comes with that. So research, talent, engineering, cloud, Internet of Things. And with that, obviously, comes the infrastructure that's needed to support that. So we're talking about data centers, land, energy, regional and international data policy around regulatory frameworks for the internet, smart cities, food, agriculture, climate, renewables to power all of this. Then there's finance and fintech, banking, telecoms, cybersecurity, education, health, and youth and entrepreneurship. So it's very diverse with a lot of opportunity. It's obviously all interconnected. And it's been very interesting to see, the solutions that are being set forth by local innovators who have like a very clear understanding of the local dynamics and that are really driven by a passion to solve real problems. And then we're also seeing the importance of the African diaspora, which is a huge segment of the global population who are, not just positioned as a market or as an audience, but as partners in the development of this infrastructure and acting as a bridge between local communities and international partners, and also, serving a role in terms of cultural diplomacy. So it's been really interesting, and I'd like to maybe dive into a few of these themes, starting with the digital economy and AI itself. So we've heard at the summit that Africa's digital economy is projected to contribute 180 billion to GDP by the end of this year, and AI, meanwhile, globally is expected to add 15.7 trillion to the global economy. Some other estimates have it at 20 trillion. And from the African perspective, we're really seeing the innovators, the corporates, and the institutions that are positioning themselves not just as users of this tech, but as actual builders that are applying the technology to real world challenges and to local realities. So for example, it's impacting all sectors. So, in agriculture, we're seeing innovators present tools around, resource management, water security, soil health. We're seeing it in education with institutions that are developing tools to engage parents that might, have lower literacy rates to engage in their child's schooling. We're seeing a rise in urbanization across the whole continent. And with that comes the co-creation of smart cities, comes a need for power and energy, renewables, decentralized grids, digital payment systems. So there's been, tremendous opportunity there. Health also is a key sector and has been at the center of a lot of conversations happening at Gitex here in Marrakesh. So the healthcare sector is projected to reach 259 billion trillion by 2030. And from the perspectives here, you know, the conversations are around sovereign data systems, data security, local infrastructure. And this tech is going to apply to everything from, you know, like the actual systems of how local communities engage with their healthcare providers to access to telemedicine, diagnostics, care. And with that, you know, comes conversations around data policy. There's over 100 government delegations here in Marrakesh for the event. I had the pleasure of speaking with Stefan Schnorr, who's Germany's State Secretary for Digital and Transport. He was also giving a keynote address yesterday on the topic of data policy and Germany's role in the collaboration with Africa. And more specifically, he's emphasizing the urgency to create an international framework for digital cooperation and really strongly advocating for an open and free internet in a context, in a context where the internet is not just browsers on our computers. Here in Africa, Internet of Things is connected to agriculture, to education, to our homes. So really advocating for a free internet so that companies from all over the world can communicate. And for that, he's advocating for a multi-stakeholder approach. And this is also in the context of the UN having to decide if the IGF, which is the Internet Governance Forum, is going to stay in the future, or if there's going to be another regulation for the internet. And
Tammy, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us. That was Tammy Emma Pepin in Marrakesh. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It is time now for the latest business news, and for that I am joined by Yuan Potts, Bloomberg reporter and regular Monocle contributor. And Yuan, let's start off with a tariffs update, because what else would we start off with these days on the markets? There is news on the US-China front.
We've got a Bloomberg scoop today on China's latest thinking on the trade situation. According to a person familiar with the Chinese government's thinking, China is open to talks with the US, but with the important precondition that such engagement will be conducted with respect. In particular, Beijing wants the White House to rein in some of the disparaging remarks made by members of Donald Trump's cabinet. Interestingly, other conditions include a more consistent US position, quite a big ask, and a willingness to address China's concerns around American sanctions and the issue of Taiwan. Interesting that Beijing's prepared to raise some of the wider issues like Taiwan that it's unhappy about. Beijing, we understand, also wants the US to put forward a point person for any talks who has the president's support and can help to prepare a deal that Trump and Xi can sign when they meet. The sources also told us that while the president has been relatively dovish when speaking publicly about Xi, you often hear President Trump being quite complimentary and quite conciliatory towards the Chinese leader. Other members of his administration have been much more hawkish, and that's, we're told, leaving officials in Beijing pretty unsure of the US position.
Well, and unsure of their own position, frankly, as well, because I understand that their international trade negotiator has been let go. And then in addition to that, there is news from China's economy today that it's actually grown faster than expected in the first quarter. I just wonder if you can pick that up at all. Has that been sort of impacting markets? Is that a positive amid all of this trade tariff stuff?
Yeah, really interesting to flag that, actually. 5.4% is the latest annual growth rate for the latest quarter out of China, which was more than economists were expecting. And it's a pretty decent clip. Ironically, a lot of the reason for that is tariffs, because so many companies in the US have been front-running the tariffs, importing stuff from China before the tariffs come. So that's got Chinese factories working much faster than usual. So China's actually outputting more stuff and sending it to the United States ahead of the tariffs. But of course, that is all history now, because the tariffs are in place. So really, for the Chinese economy, the outlook is pretty poor in the coming months if these tariffs stay in place. But I think when it comes to the US-China situation, it's really a question of who blinks first, because although China does export a huge amount to the United States and it does not want to lose all that trade, of course, the idea that the US can just cut off trade with China overnight and not have any ill effects is obviously nonsense. We interviewed the CEO of a major US toy firm recently who says his business has been completely paralyzed. 80% of toys are made in China, and he's trying to get ready for Christmas. and he's faced with a 145% surcharge. So what do? Do you suddenly pay a huge amount more for all your imports? At the moment, he's just waiting and seeing if something happens. But of course, if this were to continue all the way until the Christmas period, which I think probably is unlikely, then toys in American stores will be enormously more expensive because they're not made in the US, and the US is not going to be setting up toy factories between now and Christmas. So lots and lots of the US economy really needs to get this sorted out just in the same way that China does.
And it is amazing how early Christmas orders come in, which is why all of this is being impacted now. But just before we let you go, Yuan, there is a rate decision that is due tomorrow here in Europe, the European Central Bank on the continent, rather, not here in the UK. But how is the European Central Bank trying to make sense of all of this trade uncertainty for Europe?
Well, tricky for them like it is for the rest of us. On the EU-US trade front, not a lot of progress. We've spoken to people who were present at the meeting, the 2-hour meeting between the EU's trade chief and the US Commerce Secretary, which apparently yielded very little. You remember that the EU last week agreed to delay for 90 days its counter tariffs against the United States. So at the moment, the EU is not levying any extra tariffs on US imports. And that makes the ECB's job that much easier. Now, a rate cut tomorrow is an almost nailed-on certainty. That should bring interest rates for the 20 countries which use the euro down from 2.5% to 2.25%. Good news if you've got a mortgage, not so good if you've got savings in the bank. The background, the economic background to all of this is that services inflation has been slowing, 3.4%, the latest number, down from 3.7% at an annual rate. And services inflation, one of the key things that central banks look at, because it tends to be stickier than wider inflation. It tends to be domestically generated, so it can kind of get a life of its own. So the inflation picture is quite decent. But of course, growth in the euro area has been sluggish, and it's likely to be more sluggish still as the US tariffs kick in. So lots of worries about what it's going to do to industry in the euro area. So it's a bit of a no-brainer to cut rates. The interesting question is whether they bring in more rate cuts later in the year. Just contrast that with the poor US Federal Reserve. They've got to contend with possibly slower US growth and rising inflation from all those tariffs. So the job over at the Fed is a lot more tricky.
That infamous word stagflation in economic terms comes to mind. Yuan Potts, thank you very much for joining us on The Briefing. Now, the Osaka Expo opened on Sunday, and all this week on The Briefing, we're going behind the scenes with some of its country pavilions. Today, we're introducing the Pavilion of the Philippines. It's part of the Empowerment Life section of the Expo. And earlier, Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi spoke with Marga Nograles, Secretary General of the Philippine Organizing Committee of the World Expo Osaka 2025, to find out more.
Our Philippines Pavilion theme is nature, culture, and community, woven together for a better future, or simply just woven. So our goal and the essence of why it is our theme is because we are looking to continue on empowering our indigenous communities around the Philippines, and continue on weaving all components of the Philippines to create experiences for those that come visit the Philippines.
Yes, thank you. The unique architecture is very eye-catching. Could you tell us about the thoughts behind the design of this pavilion?
Each component of our facade is hand-woven. It is not a mere structure. It is not a building. It is an experience, and it comes to life with every piece of what we have outside. And then next also, if you notice outside, we have the hand-woven textiles framed, right? So those frames open to show live performances. So we will have live performances in our facade twice a day starting next month. So that is something you must experience. The very first time I saw the Philippine Pavilion was maybe a month ago. I cried. It was just so beautiful. We put our heart and soul into creating this experience. And, as we were creating, as we were doing the prototypes, as we were doing the drawings, we had something in mind. We wanted it to come to life, but we weren't sure. But when we saw the actual structure, it was just exactly how we imagined it to be.
Yeah, thank you. I could see the variety of textile from across Philippines. Could you tell us about the exhibits in this pavilion?
We are very proud to share that our whole pavilion is hand-woven in the Philippines, the whole facade. So from our hand-woven rattan to the over 200 hand-woven textiles by our indigenous communities all over the Philippines. So this is the largest collection of weavers ever for the Philippines. So at the Tourism Promotions Board, we have what we call our community-based tourism program. So what we do here is we empower our indigenous communities and we encourage them to keep telling their story, right? We want them to fight to keep their stories alive. So that's a big program in our agency. So it is inspired and aligned with what we are doing here.
Yes, I could enjoy many forms of entertainment here, such as dancing and photo booth with AI, and traditional massage and Filipino foods. Why did you decide to add such various entertainment elements to this pavilion?
Yes, well, first of all, there's so many stories to be told in the Philippines. We have over 7,641 islands. Each island has a unique story to tell. So what we had wanted to do is give little snippets of those experiences into the Philippines. So following our theme, we wanted to bring in that tech experience into the pavilion. But what we are saying here is as we transition into the era of the digitalization, we wanted to keep the heart of our stories alive in the Philippines because nothing will ever compare to human connection. And as we talk about it, we ask, what is the power of the Philippines? The power of the Philippines is really in our people. The talent and creativity of the Filipino is truly world-class. So as you come into the Philippines, we invite you to dance with nature. So we have live performances, but we want you to dance with us also. That's just one experience of how, when you go into the Philippines, the best experience into the Philippines should be had with a Filipino, taking you around Philippines.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks to you and the staff here, I feel like I am on the street in the Philippines.
So happy. You must come to the Philippines then. Well, I would think when they come visit and experience the Philippine Pavilion, they will want to go to the Philippines to experience for themselves the many, many, many reasons to love the Philippines.
Marga Nograles of the Philippines Pavilion at the Osaka Expo speaking to Ryuma Takahashi there. And that's all the time we have for this edition of the show. It was produced by Monica Lillis and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye and thanks for listening.